All right, so in this video, we're looking at functional groups. Functional groups are groups of atoms or elements that are attached to hydrocarbon chains. Now, on your chemistry reference tables, there's a table that'll help you figure out the functional groups, and that's table R. Now, table R can look a little bit overwhelming at first, but the most important things you need to know are how to use table R effectively so that you can answer types of questions that come up with functional groups on the Regents exam. Now, like I said before, a functional group is an element or a group of elements that are added to a hydrocarbon. Now, if you remember back to a hydrocarbon definition, hydrocarbons are only things that are made of only hydrogen and carbon. So if I'm adding a functional group, I'm no longer actually considered a hydrocarbon. However, I'm still considered an organic molecule. So on the screen now, you can see that I have an organic molecule. That's a molecule that has carbon and hydrogen, but it does not have only hydrogen and carbon. It has an oxygen in it as well. Now we can use table R in order to determine the types of functional groups that are being added to our hydrocarbons. If we zoom in here on one particular row, we can look to see the information that's provided to us on table R. So on table R, the first thing that you can see here is the class of the compound. So instead of calling it a hydrocarbon, we give it a new class name. That class name puts it in a category so that we can think about the ways that it's going to react and interact with other compounds and elements that it might be able to interact with. So for this particular example, you can see that when a halogen element is added to a hydrocarbon, we get a new compound, and that new compound is now called a halide. We can categorize any hydrocarbon that has a functional group of a halogen into this halide class. Now the second column on our table R are the actual physical functional groups that would get added to that hydrocarbon. So just like we were talking about before here for a halide class of a compound, the functional groups that get added are any of these halogens. That would be like fluorine, chlorine, bromine, or iodine. So that's what's listed in column 2. In column 3, we have some information about how the functional group is actually added to the hydrocarbon. We're going to talk more about that column in just a minute. And finally, we have column 4. And column 4 gives you a real example of a particular halide that is formed. All of the examples that are given on our reference table are given for the hydrocarbon propane and an additional functional group that's being added to that propane. So for example here, I'm showing you, you can see right here we have the compound of propane, which is what's given in all of these examples. You can see that this propane, for the example, we need to add our chlorine. That's what the example is giving us here. So we take off a hydrogen, and we're adding our chlorine right here. Now, if we go back to this column 3, we can think about this general formula right here. Now, the general formula basically gives you information on where that functional group is going to be added to the compound. So you can see here that this R actually represents the rest of this compound and shows you that the halogen can be added directly to a carbon. I'm going to give you another example of that. So if we look here at this particular example, which has our hydrocarbon, and you can see that this functional group was actually inserted right in the middle of this hydrocarbon. This functional group has the double bonded oxygen and then a single oxygen. And it's almost like they cut that hydrocarbon right down the middle and they stuck the functional group right here in the center. Now you can see that this particular R stands for this side of the hydrocarbon chain, and this R stands for the other side of the hydrocarbon chain. The R basically just represents any amount of hydrocarbon chain that would be added to either side of this particular functional group. It also tells us that in this case, for this functional group to be classified within this group or this class of a compound, that functional group has to go right in the center. Now, the most important thing that you're going to be asked to do with Table R is simply be able to recognize the functional groups within their particular compounds. So if we look here at this compound, we can see that it looks like a normal hydrocarbon, except for this double bonded oxygen right here. So what we can do is we can scan through our table and we can look for where this double bonded oxygen appears on the table. So I see a double bonded oxygen right here in my halide category. I also see a double bonded oxygen in my ketone category. So once you've identified what it might be, you can look at the rest of the compound to figure out what class it would actually fall into. So if it's a halide, the double bonded oxygen would be on my last carbon. I know that because of the functional group picture right here. If it's a ketone, the double bonded oxygen comes in the middle of the compound. You can see here I have 3 carbons and my double bonded oxygen's on the middle carbon, so it must fall into the ketone category. So I now know that this particular compound could be classified as a ketone. Now that we've gone through this demo on how to use Table R, you're going to practice using it with the video check-in. Make sure to fill this out on your worksheet. You need to highlight or circle the functional group and then name the class of the compound. Pause the video now to practice that. All right, and here's your answer key. This first group has a halogen added to it as a functional group, so it's considered a halide. The second group has an alcohol, and the last group has this amide right here. All right, it's time to move on to the practice.